And today's scripture is about two Old Testament figures who laughed at what God was doing in their lives. This first is from Genesis chapter 17, verses 1 through 7, and then I'll read verses 15 through 20. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, and I will make my covenant between me and you, and will make you exceedingly numerous. Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you. Kings shall come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and your offspring after you throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. God said to Abraham, As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she shall give rise to nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said to himself, Can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, Oh, that Ishmael might live in your sight. God said, No, but your wife Sarah shall bear a son, and you shall name him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will bless him and make him fruitful and exceedingly numerous. He shall be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Been thinking through 24 years of pastoral ministry, and in that time, I was trying to think of any time I got in trouble for being serious. I can't remember any. I can't remember any time I got in trouble for being serious, but I can think of times I got in trouble in ministry for trying to be funny. Something about humor and the church, it just doesn't always mix well. And I spent several years on our board of ordained ministry and oversaw lots of things that were there. We would always work with those who were coming in as new pastors, but sometimes pastors would get themselves into trouble, and if it got to a certain level, it would come before the board of ordained ministry. And usually it never had to do with someone being too serious or believing the right or the wrong thing. It usually came from someone doing something inappropriate, or sometimes even trying to use humor in ways that just didn't fit at the time. Humor, while in our lives we enjoy it, sometimes it just, I don't know, it doesn't always fit in the church. But today we have this scripture that reminds us that humor is even a part of what God does in ministry, that God provides laughter. And we have this story of Abraham at 100 years old finding out that he's finally going to be a father. That's humorous enough, isn't it? I don't have the energy now to, I guess I would if I had to have young children again, but I don't have anywhere close to the energy I had when I was younger today. And now, just to think about even a few years later, it would not work well, I don't think. And so he laughs. He laughs at the idea of being a father at 100 years old, or that God could even do such a thing. Maybe it was a laughter of disbelief, a laughter that wasn't quite sure it could actually happen. In the church, sometimes there are all kinds of things that are funny. It's unbelievable the things that happen in ministry, but at the time we don't always feel them as funny. Laughter can be a good thing, though. And it's interesting, in the whole of the New Testament, there really are only 2 times that laughter is mentioned. The first one is whenever Jesus is going to the home of one of the leaders of the synagogue whose daughter has died, and Jesus says that she has not, and they laugh. They laugh, and it's the kind of laughter that's a cynical laughter. It's not, the kind of laughter we all enjoy, but it's the laughter at the expense of another. They're laughing at Jesus because she has died, and how in the world does he think he can make that different? It's a cynical laughter, and we all know that laughter. We've had it directed at us. We maybe have directed it at someone else at one time or another. I remember one time, it's cruel, the things that kids in high school do sometimes. And I know I've told you the story once, so this will be twice. If I start doing it more than 3 or 4 times, then let me know. But I do realize I'm repeating myself on this one. But when I was in high school, one of the things that, for some reason, me and a couple of my friends thought it was funny to do was to, in the car, pull up to an intersection and just pick someone out randomly and point at them and laugh. And so we did that. We pulled up to this intersection. It was besides the Buchanan's grocery store at 59th and Western that my mother shopped in every week. And I was in that place every week. We pulled up, and we were stopped at the light, and there was a car pulled right there. There's this gentleman who was in the car, and we all pointed at him, and we started laughing. And he was probably in his 50s then, maybe in his 60s. He looked ancient. But and then he got out of the car, he opened the door to the car, and as he walked into the store, he had a limp. And it was the last time we ever did it, because it was a laughter that was meant to be playful, but it felt so hurtful then. We didn't intend it to be hurtful, but it felt hurtful. And never saw that man again until I was finishing up seminary. And I was getting ready to come back to Oklahoma to serve my first church. And I've been talking on the phone with my district superintendent, and we were working out where my first church was going to be. And I had my first meeting with him. I've never seen the guy. And we, I get out of the car, and he's walking into the office, and it's this gentleman, and he has this limp as he walks in. And I look at him, and I realize this is that man from high school years ago. It impressed me so much, because I felt so bad about it. And it was kind of, I never said a word to Charles Wells about what had happened when I was in high school. And maybe he totally had no connection to me in relationship to that. But it was as if God was going to get the last laugh. God was going to get the last laugh in that. And it was my boss, my supervisor, who I had laughed at with such cynical laughter. I don't do things like that anymore. I've learned a few lessons in life. There is another type of laughter that's mentioned in the New Testament, and that is the laughter of reversal. When things make a turn in the end, and they surprise us with something positive. It is when Jesus says, "Blessed are those who weep now, for they shall laugh." And it's when through the redemption of the cross that Jesus turns our brokenness into places of healing, where Jesus takes our weeping and makes it a place of joy and a place of laughter. It's through the cross that Jesus turns that whole story around. The world thinks that they have won, and it is only the beginning of a different ending than it could imagine. One that ends with celebration and joy, of new life, of laughter. Jesus is the one who turns our wailing, our sorrow, into laughter. It's because of our place in him. And can you imagine Sarah? I love the story of Sarah, maybe even more than the one of Abraham's laughter, because the angel comes to tell Abraham again and to make sure he understands the point of it. And Sarah is in the tent. And when Sarah hears that she will bear a child, then she begins to laugh. And the angel said, is Sarah laughing? And oh, no, 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 not laughing. It's this kind of playful back and forth. Is she laughing? And says, oh, no, I'm not laughing. But of course she was. And it's not that laughter bothered God. The angel came, and it wasn't about punishment for laughing. It was just the playfulness of the interchange between the two of them, her laughter. Isaac is to be born, and we know what Isaac's name means, don't we? It means laughter. Laughter. Because now Sarah says, at first everyone laughed at me. She had no children. They laughed at me, but now they will laugh with me. It's the turning around of the story. It is the miraculous sense of laughter that we have, and we have a sense of joy in our lives, and we can live with that great sense of humor and laughter. The first church I served, I mentioned to you, was at, just because it's funny, a holy cow, right? Holy cow. The first church I served, Inner City Church, Penn Avenue, 13th and North Penn. If you've driven around that area, it's where the AMC used to be, I guess, that was there on 10th Street. Now, big Salvation Army headquarters that's there. Served that church, and we decided most of our members had lived in that neighborhood, but they'd all moved out, and we were trying to find a way to get re-engaged with the neighborhood again, and folks that were real different than most of the people that were there. We had a day when we were going to go out and do visits, and so Bill and Jackie were two of the folks who were going to go out. And Bill and Jackie had faithful Methodists their whole life long, had lived most of their life in Kansas, but had recently, several years before, moved into the community, and great people. They were helping us go out, and so we went out, and they were supposed to go to 13th Street, to turn north onto Virginia, and to go up to the Gatewood area. But instead, they turned south, and they ended up in some rather rough apartments. And they actually evangelized the wrong neighborhood. We decided what neighborhood they were supposed to go to, but they evangelized the wrong one. And, it's a little bit of humor in that. But as they get there, they met this young woman. Her name was Shonda. And Shonda was a single mom, had a couple of kids, and she had been dealing with in her life a serious drug issue. But she got, Jackie and Bill got her coming to church, and they would pick her up and bring her, and they even, came to Bible study, and we were, in the midst of the Bible study and talking about the lesson in Sunday school, and while all that was going on, someone talked about how, we have struggles with sin, and she says, yeah, I understand that. I mean, whenever I was strung out on crack, you know what that's like, right? And she's looking at a group of 60 and 70-year-old ladies who are in her class, and of course they didn't identify with that at all. And and she, man, it was tough. And I was with this guy, and he used to beat up on me. And now I'm finally gotten out of that relationship. And Jackie was just, she was having a hard time figuring out what to do. And we finally got through the class, and it was kind of one of those hard moments. You didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. And then Jackie kind of made a turn at the end of it. And I said, well, I'm sorry it didn't go the way you wanted. And she said, oh, no, this is fine. I'm going to go make some phone calls, because I think I can get a crowd for this, and begin to find a way to make it work and be able to find a sense of laughter in the midst of the brokenness. We can sometimes have those kind of difficulties, and if we allow, it can become heavy, and it can become overburdening. Or we can invite God in with us, and maybe we can find a place of laughter in the midst of it. Cynical laughter turned into joyous laughter. That's what we're looking for. Finding a way to turn the brokenness into a place of healing, to find joy in our lives. served a lot of churches. One of the appointments I had was Tuskegee. I remember whenever it was one of those last-minute appointments, things had really gotten bad the first week of May, and we knew for several months we were going to be staying at the church we were at. And then on Friday morning, my good friend, the district superintendent who lived down the street, called me at the house. It was 7 in the morning. He said, "Scott, what time are you going to be in the office?" That was not a good way to start the conversation. There wasn't any good way. But it gave me an idea what was headed. And I said, "I can be there anytime you'd like." "Well, when's the secretary get there?" She'll be there at 9. He said, "Why don't we meet at 8:30? I said, "Okay." So he comes into the office and he said, "Scott, we've got a situation. Now, I want you to know it's a $12,000 raise." He hit that part first, so that felt good, but we would like you to go, and we were in Moore at the time, we would like you to go serve Pawnee and Skeety. They've had some trouble. They need someone who can come in and bring some healing. And I couldn't, it was tough to get my mind around it. I said, "Do I have any choice in this?" And he said, "You can appeal it, but I wouldn't recommend it." And I said, "Okay." I called Angie and told her, or we talked, I guess, when she got home from school, and the thing I remember her saying is, "Skeety is not even on the map." I remember, she had looked at the map, and it was not even on the map. And it was because it was the wrong map she was looking at. If you look at the map of ghost towns in Oklahoma, Skeety is on it. Skeety and Merrimack and Blackburn all are within just a few miles of each other. And they all compete about who will have the highest population from year to year. They all are between 90 and 100. And none of them have over 100 people, but depending on who dies and who's born, they all will have 90 to 100, and from year to year, any of those three can have the highest population. And Skeety was, it was the other church in the 2-point charge. The church in Pawnee had 100 or so in worship each Sunday. The church at Skeety had 25. And they were good people, good-hearted people. Some of my favorite people are from Skeety. Did you know Wes Welker, his grandparents live in Skeety? His aunt was my secretary. And so whenever Wes Welker was playing at Texas Tech, we were all rooting for him and watching his career as he moved through, and just, fun, lots of great people there. 2 people that were a part of that church, the Peckinpah sisters. They, of course, had married. Their maiden name, or Peckinpah was their maiden name, but I only call that because the way that they related to each other looked like a couple of chickens pecking and pawing at each other. They had gotten to the place, Mom always held them together, but in the year before I came, Mom had passed away. And there were some disputes over land and money, that happens in families sometimes. And they got to the point where they weren't speaking to each other. Mom had been the matriarch of that church, and so in a way, there was a bit of competition of who was going to be the next matriarch of this church. One of them played the piano, the other one played the organ. And on Sunday mornings, they would not speak to each other. They would not speak to each other at all, except the piano and the organ were back to back, and one of them would say to the other, for the introit or for the prelude, they would say number 23, and the other would go, mm-hmm, and then that would be it. And then when it came time for the offertory, one would say 153, and the other would go, mm-hmm, and that would be it. And that's all they would say to one another. Peck and paw at each other. And now, with some distance, I can laugh about it. It's funny. But man, we walked around eggshells because no one wanted to break the bit of peace we had and let it turn into something more. It was a place where I wish I could say we got over it. It didn't happen. We often carry such burdens in our lives. I pray someday they'll be able to find laughter in the midst of it again. we have relationships that are that way, that there's brokenness that we experience, and in the midst of it, it feels just hard. But maybe we can get to the other side of it, and we can find a place of laughter. We look for God's healing, because when God's healing comes, we can truly find it. There are lots of stories of ministry, some that are appropriate to tell, others that aren't so appropriate. A few years ago, a person had gotten mad at me at the Prague church, and so they started going around telling everybody that we were going to move because Angie had gotten a new job at Rose State, and that we were going to move. And so, the only way I knew to kind of deal with that was just, I told everybody that next Sunday, I said, we're here, we're staying. In fact, I've ordered 6 new rose bushes I'm planning to plant. I'm going to be planting this spring. I've ordered them. They're coming in the next month, and we'll get them all planted up out there. And, I wouldn't be doing that if I were moving this year. And it allowed a bit of ease, because maybe they wanted me to move, that person, but they were, I guess, just wanting to try to avoid a fight in a way. And I remember back when I was at Pawnee, most of the times I think of that are laughter moments are times I really did get myself into a bit of trouble one way or another. We had decided, there are a group of us in town, that we needed to start a free health clinic. They'd started one at the other end of the county at Cleveland, and one night a week, every Thursday night, there were doctors and volunteer nurses and pharmacists who came and just operated a free clinic where people who didn't have health insurance could come and could see a doctor, and if they had an injury, could get fixed. If they had a cold, they could get made better, and so the folks there wanted us to start one, and we knew there was such a need, a lot of poverty in rural Oklahoma that people don't necessarily see. We see poverty in the city, but there's deep poverty in pockets of rural Oklahoma that kind of go unseen, and so with some volunteers from the church, and myself and the pastor at the Christian church were the leaders of this to get it to happen. And we had one of the doctors in town was Methodist, and one of the doctors was a part of the Christian church. One of the pharmacists in town was a part of the Christian church, and another was Methodist. And we just kind of had all these pieces in place, and we were beginning to make the steps in the movement toward opening the clinic. And pretty soon I looked over and realized I was standing out there alone. The pastor of the Christian church, he began to feel some pressure in his congregation, because not all the folks who lined up and were behind that in the Methodist church were also behind it at the Christian church. And because of that pressure, and because he was 58 years old, and if you're a pastor in the church, the Disciples of Christ church, you can be voted out of your church at any time. He realized at 58, who's going to want me to come be their pastor if things go the wrong way? And so he began to pull back in his role of leadership. Mostly it was because D-Joe didn't want there to be a free health clinic. D-Joe owned the newspaper in town. D-Joe's brother owned the newspaper in Cleveland. And so D-Joe didn't want it to happen. And so he stood against it, and he happened to be a member of the Christian church. And that support kind of fell by the way. We continued, we pushed, we opened the clinic, and then D-Joe got mad at me. And so I got called into the office. D-Joe was one of those who felt like he could do that. He called me into his office and said, well, how come I have to read my brother's paper in Cleveland to find out that the free clinic was opening here in Pawnee? And I said, well, the way I understood reporters is that they go out and find news to report. And I didn't bring it to you. You're right. I probably should have, could have. But, any decent reporter I know knows how to go out and find a story. And he was not happy with me, but he was not in my church, so I didn't have to worry about that one. I remember one day I was sitting in the church office. Another person in town had gotten mad at me. I didn't realize so many people were mad at me. The problem was we were talking about race relations. And Pawnee is a town that has a large tribal presence in it, also has a significant African-American presence in it. And unfortunately, churches are not the most integrated places. And I talked about that in relationship to our church. And I said, but it's not only our church, it's throughout our whole community. Our whole community has issues of race that need to be dealt with. And I mentioned the schools as one of those places in passing. Well, the superintendent heard I had said there were race problems in the school. In fact, it got reported way higher than I'd ever even indicated. And I said to him, he came into my office just as angry as could be. And I was still kind of hurt about that. I was kind of, ruffled up about it, and I was complaining to someone who had come into the office. And Kirk Lewis, the old farmer, firefighter, raises race horses. And he would never bet on them. He'd take his horses to race at Remington, but he would never bet on the horses, he'd tell me. And he said, he came into the office that day, and he said, Scott, what's so good that God saved it for himself? He said, it's not sex. All of us participate in that. It's not chocolate pie. We all get to eat chocolate pie. He said, what's the one thing that God was so good that God saved it only for himself? I didn't know. He said, didn't it say somewhere, vengeance is mine, says the Lord? Then he picked up his cup of coffee and he walked out the door. Kind of stung a bit because I was wanting to be a bit vengeful. I was wanting to hold anger, and Kirk was telling me I needed to let it go. Just let it go and go on. And it was a good, important lesson to me in my life, that there are things that we sometimes hold on to that really can't do much to change. We just got to let it go and move on. And Kirk and his cowboy boots and who knows what else came in and provided that lesson for me. I do remember the Sunday at Wesley where I really kind of messed up for some. It was about this time of year, and in fact, it was just a couple of weeks earlier. And in the lesson, I wanted to talk about how you transform things that might symbolize one thing into something else. And I started by bringing in a box full of Mardi Gras beads. And I tossed the Mardi Gras beads to a few people in the church. And because you know what? There's a way to turn and to twist those beads to form a cross. And that was the lesson. It was about how we transform something that holds one meaning into something that's redemptive. But man, was it scandalous. And I had a few phone calls of people who were upset at me, and the district superintendent got a phone call because I threw Mardi Gras beads in the church. It just was not right. It was not appropriate. We get ourselves all twisted up sometimes about things that don't seem appropriate in life. It's funny. It's funny how we are. Nothing about church, just one of the funny stories of when I was in Prague. First time I went to get my hair cut, someone told me, go get this person. And man, I realized she was the gossip of town. If you wanted to know anything about what was going on, that was the place to go. So I learned that while I was there. It was the only time I got my hair cut there. But after I'd finished, she didn't tell me how much it was. And I said, so what do I owe you? And she said, well, for a regular person haircut, I charge $15. For bald men and for babies, I charge $5. For you, I'll charge you $10. And, I just was like, what does that mean? And I'm a little sensitive about what hair I've got still. I'm trying to hang on to it, but going to charge me 10. And I said, no, thank you. I'll pay 15. And I paid the 15, and I left and didn't ever go back there. And I found myself a regular barber who, doesn't offend you so easily. But maybe I'm being a little sensitive. I don't know. But cynical laughter, it robs the soul. But joyous laughter opens the door for God to come into our lives, for God to be one with us, and this crazy little statue is called Buddy Jesus. It's always irritated me, but it's kind of funny, Buddy Jesus, who knows our life so well that he can laugh with us. Laughter that's cynical tears down, but laughter that is redemptive brings joy to our lives and to our souls. One last story. Well, I'll tell one. We are at the beginning. We're coming into 2 years now, and there are a few stories I could tell that would bring laughter for us about our life together. I'll not go there yet, but if you don't want me to use your name in any stories, just tell me what name you'd like me to use, in years down the road, because I'll substitute names in there if I need to. But nothing about riding with any of you, okay? Yeah, I could tell a few of those, but I'm not going to. This was whenever, again, back at that first church, and Charles Wells was my superintendent, and he wanted me to be the leader of district camp, to be the dean of district camp. And I said, okay. And the theme of camp that year was tearing down the walls, or bringing down the walls. And it was about the walls that divide us, how we bring them down, walls that would separate us. And we were in the South Oklahoma City district, which included a good part of Northeast Oklahoma City, included Capitol Hill. And in our district, we had African-American churches, we had new Hispanic churches, we had a Korean congregation, and none of those churches had been participating in district camp. And so I thought, man, if we're doing a lesson about tearing down the walls, let's not just talk about it, let's do it. And so I found support, some money to scholarship kids to camp who would have never come before. And so we got kids to come who were a part of Skyline Urban Ministries after school, the summer programs. We got kids that came out of Christ Church in Northeast Oklahoma City. We got kids that came out of the Hispanic Mission to be a part of it. We got kids from the Korean church for the first time ever to come to camp. And kids that didn't always fit the mold of who we expected to come to camp. And so I knew that we needed to not just send the regular staff people that we would always have, but we needed to have staff people who knew how to work with kids who came from different backgrounds, kids who were troubled. And in the recruiting, I was naive about some things, but I recruited folks to be staff members, some of whom smoked. And I hadn't thought about what you do with staff members at a church camp that smoke. And what I found out was there was an area that had been typically set aside for adults to go and to smoke if they needed to. And so that's what we did. We set that up as our policy for those adult staff that were working with kids, particularly kids who came from diverse backgrounds like that, to be able to go and to smoke. And I thought we had it all covered. But the thing I didn't know is that some kid was going to bring 3 cartons of cigarettes and his suitcase to camp with him. And we had set up a policy that if you were going to smoke, this is where you were going to smoke. And so pretty soon we had a few kids start showing up at the pad to go smoke cigarettes. And then he began selling them to other kids around the camp. We ended up having to pull all of those in, but it took a while. But I had a pastor calling me saying, "What is going on at your camp? I got this call from a parent who got a call from their child saying they needed money so they could buy cigarettes at camp." And at the time, I was mortified. Now I can laugh. It's been 20 years. But sometimes you get yourself into places that you never thought you would. And it's always when you're following the lead of Christ in your life. Whenever we follow Christ's lead, often we will find ourselves walking in places we never expected to be, dealing with situations we never expected, finding ourselves in places where we don't know whether to laugh or to cry. But if you listen close, I think you'll hear Sarah and Abraham are laughing. And theirs is a laughter of redemption. It's a laughter that turns our mourning into laughter, that turned our sorrow into joy. Let's find a way to laugh with them and to laugh with God and to find humor as a place of redemption. Amen.